Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. We're demystifying case lines this morning. This is a favorite topic of mine, and hopefully you'll walk away with some tips and tricks to apply to your workflow. Before we welcome our panel, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge this land inspired by the calls to action contained in the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. We respectfully acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of many nations, including Halton region, where I live. Halton is on the traditional lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit, part of the Anishinaabe Nation that extends from the Niagara Peninsula across Hamilton, Halton, Toronto, to the Rouge River Valley. We thank the Mississaugas of the Credit Nations for sharing their traditional territory with us, and we recognize the enduring presence of the Indigenous people on this land. We offer our gratitude to the First Nations for their care for and teachings about our earth and our relations. May we honor those teachings. So welcome everyone today. Case lines, my favorite topic and yours. I am welcoming an esteemed panel this morning of case managers and litigation paralegals from across Canada. I am Stephanie Mills, your moderator today. I am at Castles Brock and I've been there for about 12 to 13 years. During the course of that time, I've had the pleasure of participating in about 4 or 5 different hearings or arbitrations. And I can say hands down that CaseLines has changed my practice. It has streamlined everything for me. I am no longer waiting for paper to be delivered at 3 in the morning. I am no longer shredding information at the end of a trial. CaseLines has provided me with a streamlined approach and an instrumental way of managing that evidence. We are also joined by Gretel Best, Manager of Litigation Support and e-Discovery. Gretel oversees the day-to-day operations of Gowlings. She provides cost-effective, proportionate, and defensible e-discovery strategies, advice, case management, and litigation support to Gowlings and its clients. Claire Morrow joins us from Torys. She specializes in litigation technology and is responsible for the oversight of litigation law clerks and the delivery of e-discoveries at Torys. Claire works closely with Torys lawyers to develop and implement the best combination of legal processes, project management, and technology to deliver efficient legal services to our clients. Tracy McBride joins us from Vancouver this morning, and she is at Miller Thompson in the e-discovery services group. Tracy provides electronic evidence and e-trial support at the national level. She uses technology to assist clients in developing strategies to cull data and assist with evidence preservation, collection, and overall document management. Last but certainly not least, we have Betty Montoni from Thomson Reuters. Betty is an e-discovery and product specialist and provides consulting to law firms, corporations, and litigation departments of various government branches. She acts as a liaison between Thomson Reuters sales professionals and customers and has extensive knowledge and information to clients regarding Thomson Reuters legal solutions. Betty has over 2 decades of legal experience working in legal technology and e-discovery, and she has extensive experience in e-discovery procedures and project management of large litigation files. Thank you all, ladies, for joining us today, and I look forward to hearing what you also have to say about your love for case lines. And so to that, I will turn it over to Claire to discuss how Torys has adopted this platform.
Thanks, Stephanie. So the first message I want to impart to our participants this morning is that adoption is a journey. It is a process. We began this journey just about 12 months ago. And interestingly enough, our first case on CaseLines was not in Ontario. So we had been eagerly following the announcements, the practice directions, starting in about August of 2020, and we're sort of waiting anxiously to onboard the CaseLines experience. What ended up happening was our Calgary office, an associate in our Calgary office reached out to me and said, have you heard of CaseLines? You seem to be the contact person at Torys. I was like, yes, I've heard of it. We do not have an existing matter on it. What can we do for you? And they reached out because Justice ACEDS in the Alberta Court of Queen's Bench, who I understand hears a lot of insolvency matters, she had at a case management conference encouraged counsel to run the matter on CaseLines. So was a bit of a mad scramble because, as you know, these things sort of happen at the 11th hour. But fortunately, we connected with Betty and we connected with Betty's colleagues in the UK. We were able to get training for the core legal team and support in a very short period of time. And for that, we were very grateful. And we were set up, we set up our own instance on a transactional basis. And we were the administrator of the case effectively because our client was the monitor. And so we undertook that, and we invited a huge service list of participants, as you can imagine, in an insolvency hearing, and people were quickly able to get their documents up. So one of the first takeaways I got from that was, wow, that was really quick, even though we were sort of flying by the seat of our pants with our first instance. Two, you don't have to be a courthouse to use it. You don't have to rely on Ontario. So the overall takeaway that I wanted to sort of leave you all with is be proactive. So if you still have not participated in a matter on CaseLines, or you're not aware of a matter in your firm or departments, please reach out to Thomson Reuters. And Betty's going to talk at the end of our session and give you a lot of more insight into how you can do that. But as part of the opportunity that we've taken advantage of through that relationship is we have a training environment, and we allow especially our assistants who are preparing documents, to upload their materials to the training environment. They can do things like test hyperlinks, test the uploading process, and we use it quite frequently, as I said, for in-house training. Betty, did you want to make a quick mention about as the administrator, I think there was a concern that maybe I would have undue access to all the other parties' matters, and I think this might be a good moment to mention that about notes and various security features.
Sure. Thank you, Claire. Indeed, as a case administrator or case manager relating to CaseLines, you deem to be the owner of that particular case, and hence you're the one that's designing it and inviting other parties. The scary part of that in terms of, insecurity is really it doesn't need to be there. In fact, when notes are created within the scope of the CaseLines platform and they're deemed to be private, they are indeed private. It is not accessible by any other person, including the case manager or administrator. It's tied to your login credentials. So as long as you don't share your login information vis-a-vis your email address and password, no one will see those private notes. So it's very effective for the judges as well when they're creating their own commentary within the scope of CaseLines.
Thanks, Betty. So the second note I wanted to mention with regard to adoption is rollout and training. And the lesson that I've taken away from the past year and a bit is be flexible. So the important thing is that you need to sort of understand the different users and stakeholders who are going to be working with CaseLines. And so we've sort of divided our buckets into lawyer training, which is on stage and in terms of case presentation, and admin training. And we do a lot of admin training with our assistants and our law clerks. Our law clerks sort of straddle both environments because they both work with the review evidence part of the platform and presenting evidence, but also they work sort of in the backstage part, setting up the file. And so what we did is we moved from sort of a soup to nuts approach in the very beginning, where we had Thomson Reuters come in and do extensive training. And the feedback that we received really was, just-in-time training for us is a better approach, especially for our legal professionals. And so what we offer now to anybody that's going to be participating in a hearing, usually I schedule about 2 to 3 days prior to the hearing. We do about 15 to 30 minutes of bespoke training within their own active matter so that they can test presenting evidence, they can test hyperlinks, and people find a lot of comfort in that. And we've had a lot of repeat visitors. So people that maybe did a hearing with CaseLines in the first few months of the rollout, things have changed on the platform. They want to know what has changed. And so we're able to be pretty nimble and respond to those needs and questions. And the last note I want to say about that is we recently took on board some feedback from our admin staff about them really wanting us to break down concepts and topics into tasks. And so we've just successfully completed a month of what we call express training or lightning sessions, where based on a survey of our admin professionals, they identified the tasks that to them were most common, most challenging, and again, lots of repeat participants in that. So if they didn't get it the first time around, and we only spend about 15 minutes on the show and tell part, so they get time to do a lot of questions. And as I said, they get invited into our practice environment. And so that's been a really successful approach. So I encourage all of you to be flexible, be creative, you know, different styles of learning will help people retain it. And the feedback is that once they've had a bit of practice, it really is comfortable. And so that is, you know, one of the best things I love about CaseLines is sort of once you get a hand of it, it is very easy and very seamless. So I'm going to take you through some pro tips. If we can go to the next slide, Stephanie. And just some key things that are quite, and I think in the initial presentation, when people get exposed to CaseLines, they get a bit overwhelmed by it, but it's really not, you know, rocket science. I think it's actually quite seamless. So the one concept that I'd like to just mention is how to upload a bookmark PDF. So as you know, most of us prepare, say a motion record as an example, as one consolidated document. And I've put a little screen cap there. I hope people can see it. So in that particular PDF document, tab 1 was the notice of motion. Tab 2 is the affidavit in support with all of the corresponding exhibits to that affidavit. And then there was a draft order. And so that came in as one bookmark. And I think in the early days of CaseLines rollout, there was confusion that people would have to then go to the extra effort of then splitting out all of these into separate documents. CaseLines makes it very easy. You can simply go into the upload files area and then select, and I don't know if you can make it out in the screen cap there, upload bookmarked PDF into a single section. And effectively down below at the bottom right of the screen, what you can see is the tabs that are identified as first level bookmarks, that notice of motion, the affidavit, and the draft order, they came in as individual documents. But pursuant to the practice direction, tab 2, the affidavit, was a single document and all of the exhibits were retained together. And, you know, that's a fairly straightforward process. If people need to split things out or to do upload bookmark and not, we just encourage them to do sort of separate uploads. The other nice thing about this is that your documents effectively come in the order that you put them in the motion record. So you don't have to be scrambling around once the documents are uploaded and reorganizing them and reordering them. Okay, does any of the panelists want to add anything there on best practices? Nope, okay. So let's move on to pro tip number 2, hyperlinking. So hyperlinking can be, I think, a real headache for a lot of people. PDF hyperlinking has been a challenge over the last while, and we've put a lot of effort as a profession in responding to the practice directions in Ontario to make sure that those PDF documents in our motion records have lovely hyperlinks, you know, within the document, or we hyperlink from a factum to our exhibits. And CaseLines actually makes this a lot easier. Initially, we were training our folks on CaseLines hyperlinking, but hat tip to our colleagues at Lensners, who I think introduced our group to this, and we've adopted it, and it's taken off like wildfire. There is a way to hyperlink to create a deep link to every single page of the record that you upload into CaseLines. And you do this within the review evidence panel. You go to the view tab, as you can see on the screen cap, and then you simply go to the page that you want to link to, your destination, and you select copy link. And you get that wonderful little green affirmation that the link has successfully been created. And then working outside of CaseLines in your Word factum, a Word version, or a PDF version, or your Word compendium, or table of contents, or whatever it is that your source document is directing people to this page, that's where you insert your link. And I can tell you that I've had top-down feedback from people saying, we like this so much better. It reads on the page a lot better than finding the little, I think watermarks, or I don't know how you describe them, Betty, but the little signals, little stamps for the hyperlinks in the CaseLines way, especially when you have, maybe you have a footnote in a factum that has like 30 references to various bits of evidence. Where do you stick those little stamps? So there's not a lot of room on the margins, and the lawyers like this a lot better. The court likes it better. And if we can go to the next slide, I can show you a screen cap. So the next tip is using tables of contents, but it really flows from that tip about hyperlinking. And what you can see here is a table of contents was created. They added the hyperlink to the description of the document. I think some people like to put it on the CaseLines page number. That is, I think up to you or your judge, whatever decisions or instructions you receive. But what ends up happening is, because we created those hyperlinks using the previous method, what you have now is that lovely lavender bar hyperlinking the description, as opposed to having to insert little hyperlink stamps kind of next to the the originating link. And so what we've recommended is, when your people are creating the tables of contents, create that. You're going to have to come back and add the CaseLines page number. So create it off the hop, so you know how many pages the TOC comes in as, and then go back and once the other materials have been loaded, then you know what the destination page is, and then you create those links and you replace it once that's prepared. I'm conscious of time and I don't want to take up too much more of it. Just a couple more tips. When you are actually presenting evidence in the review evidence mode, we really like the use of multiple panes. And the first few times you try to figure it out, because there's a lot of buttons, and you can see from my arrows that you have to sort of go step by step. But once you've figured out which is going to be your main directive pane, and in my example here, it's the navy blue bar, and that would be my outline perhaps, or my compendium, or even the factum. And the destination pane that might, when I click a link and go to another document, that's where the document's going to appear. So in my example, it's the burgundy on the right. And you can see that in the index over here, that the two panes are highlighted separately. So the colors help you see which document is currently active in which window, which pane. But also, when you're doing the direct to, you can keep your outline showing in the left-hand pane, if that's the pane that you prefer, and keep using that to navigate. But you can also switch the destination pane instructions functions at the top. You can see at the very top left of where the arrow is pointing, I've selected right pane, and now the toolbar has turned to sort of pink highlighting to show that all of the functions that I'm operating up in the toolbar are applying to that right-hand window, so that when I activate page directions, that is exactly the destination. So they're not seeing, the duck feet running under the water. They're not seeing the outline. They're only being directed to what you're seeing on the right. So it's a really nice feature, gives you a lot of control, and kind of eliminates a little bit of the clicking and floundering and, oh, how do I get back? Because you've got the control. You're either using a table of contents in the left-hand window, an outline, a compendium, and it's actually quite seamless. So once you get a handle of which little buttons to click and you get it set up, and we spend a lot of time with our associates going over that, people get quite comfortable quite quickly the first few times, and then they're off to the races. I think I have one more. I was talking about page direction, so that ties in really nicely. The last tip that I have to share today is using the page direction feature on the Find tab, and you can see I've just blown that up a bit from the previous page. I am on my pink highlighted tab because I'm directing from the right pane. I think some of my colleagues say, let's talk to everyone at the beginning and say, we'd like everyone to turn their page directions on, so that when you are directing, people will get that and you will confirm. You confirm as the director that you want to send everyone to B30, and then the other participants will get a pop-up saying, Claire Mora would like to direct you to page B30. Would you like to go there? And you say, okay. So that's really all the pro tips I have today. I welcome my co-panelists to jump in if there's anything that they'd like to add. But
Thank you. Thanks for that, Claire. It was awesome. And I just have to add, with respect to this page direction feature, it's my favorite feature of CaseLines. And you need, I think, a lot of users, judges included, aren't familiar with this. And so my tip would be to advise the lawyers when they're doing their introductions, when they're doing their housekeeping, to let the judge and as well as their colleagues know that this feature exists and how to turn it on and how to use it, and that it will be used in your motion or your trial. Because otherwise judges aren't really familiar and everyone's trying to get to the page on their own use of CaseLines, whereas this is a feature that is incredibly helpful. It's and it'll streamline the process. So again, just advising your lawyers to do a little bit of housekeeping when they initially go to the motion and or trial, and assist everybody to turn their page direction on, and then you're golden after that, and it works really, really well. And so thank you for all of your tips. We're now going to turn to Gretel Best, who I believe is the pioneer in CaseLines, as well as using it effectively. And so she's going to give us a little bit of tips and tricks in her experience in the trenches.
Thank you, Stephanie. I wish I was the pioneer. I owe that to Betty, but thank you for that introduction. And hi, everyone. As Stephanie has mentioned, I'm going to quickly just go over some lessons learned that we've recently encountered. So I've called my section In the Trenches, just to give you some practical tips and talk about some lessons learned that we've encountered. We just recently finished a very long trial and we use CaseLines. We also use CaseLines for other matters, but in the long trial that we just completed, it was really, really helpful, and it streamlined the process and made it really, really efficient. So there's a few points that I just wanted to talk about, and it starts with coordinating the use of CaseLines and your hearing. And there's 3 points of coordination that I would recommend. And the first one would be coordination with counsel. So when you are preparing for a hearing and you know you're going to be using CaseLines, probably any other platform as well for presentation, but particularly CaseLines, it's really good to have a chat with opposing counsel just to talk about what documents you both may want to present so that you can put it in a joint document brief. Otherwise, both parties or multiple parties may be uploading the same document to CaseLines, and you will have it now with different CaseLines numbers. So if you can, and in order to reduce costs that might be associated with the pages, coordinate with counsel and talk about, what documents do they want to rely on? Can you prepare a joint brief so that there's only one set of CaseLines numbers that are attached to a particular document. Another thing you might want to talk about is how to deal with witnesses and experts and objections. So if opposing counsel is going to be presenting a document to a witness and you object, or you want to object, how are you going to deal with that? Do you want to pause before the document is actually page directed in CaseLines and then maybe segregate the witness or the expert in another Zoom room? Those kinds of things. What do you want to do? How is that process going to work, and what is it going to look like? Just so that during your argument, you're not stumbling across that when you do want to raise an objection. You don't want the witness or the expert to hear the objection, or you want to segregate them. You'll know how that workflow will be applied and what will happen. Another thing you might want to talk about with opposing counsel is what section requirements you need and how those sections will be allocated. This is also going to depend on where your CaseLines database is stored, and I'm going to get to that in a second. But you may want to talk about what the organization will look like, so everybody knows where their documents will go, what section each party will have, and you're not intermingling documents, and it's a clear identification within CaseLines itself as to who is loading documents where. Second, coordinate with the court. So in Ontario, we've rolled out CaseLines across the province, as everybody knows, but it may not have been rolled out in other provinces, and that may be coming, but as of now, it hasn't been. So coordinating with the court in Ontario is going to be different than coordinating with the court in other provinces. In Ontario, court staff already know how to create the databases. There's a template for our databases, and there's a template for security groups. So parties will already have these security group permission settings already applied to their database, and court staff just adds them to particular groups. Whereas in other provinces, you may be setting up your workspace from scratch, and you might want to coordinate with the court, and you might have a bit more flexibility with your sections and who has access to what. So talk about that with the court and in coordination with counsel, so that the court and counsel know what you're going to be doing on the day of your hearing. And actually yesterday, when our group was talking about this, Betty raised an important point in that you may, and actually Stephanie as well, you may want to let counsel and the court know that you will be page directing. And I know in talking to some of the judiciary, page direction isn't always used. So letting everyone know what the plan will be for the day of the hearing. You're going to be page directing, turn your page direction on, all of that stuff would be really helpful, just so that, again, you're not scrambling. During your argument, with the technology, you can actually focus on your argument and your law versus trying to figure out how to push the buttons and get everything working properly. Next slide, please. The third coordination point I would suggest is internally. So when you are planning a CaseLines hearing, it really is important to speak to your internal team and your litigation support team, if you have an internal lit support team, just to figure out how it's going to work. And one of the things that I always find is that people know they're using CaseLines, but sometimes they forget that if you're virtual, you're also going to be using a collaboration tool in addition to CaseLines, like Zoom. We're on Zoom right now. Zoom and CaseLines are separate. So if you are going to be appearing virtually, you're going to want to make sure that you know what collaboration tool you're going to be using in addition to CaseLines. And there's multiple tools out there. There's Zoom, WebEx, GoToMeeting. There's a ton of them. So you're going to want to make sure that your legal team knows how to use the collaboration tool. They know how to use Zoom. They know how to use WebEx. If they need training, you're going to want to train them before the hearing so that they're comfortable in the collaboration platform. You're also going to want to figure out if the platform you're using has any licensing issues. So I know way back before our firm had a full-blown version of Zoom, we had a certain amount of time that we could present in Zoom, and it was limited to, I think, 45 minutes. So you're going to want to make sure that if you're hosting your collaboration application for your hearing, that you're not going to have any time limit restrictions, and you're going to be able to talk for 2 hours if your hearing is going to go for 2 hours. So figure out your licensing if that time limit is going to be an issue, and make sure that your people know how to use the collaboration tool in addition to CaseLines. And also, if you are going to be using CaseLines and your lawyers are going to be arguing, you're going to want to coordinate with them to see if they need help with page direction or presentation. So sometimes the lawyers don't want to be arguing and page directing. And if that's the case, you're going to want to have somebody available to page direct for them. And in that instance, you're going to also want that person who's going to be page directing to know in advance, ideally, what documents your lawyers will be referring to in CaseLines and what those CaseLines numbers are. So it's really important, if you have production numbers that your team has referred to in their prep material, that they've converted that to CaseLines numbers so that you don't have to do that work while you're page directing. You're going to want to know what the CaseLines number is in advance so you can queue it up and have it ready to page direct when your lawyer's argument gets to that point. And also it's, yes, sorry,
for
Stephanie.
interrupting. I just wanted to add to that point, which I found worked really well when we were at trial, is that trial counsel would give me their script and I would go through it and I would have all of the case line numbers ready. And when they were making their arguments, I would know which document they'd have it next, and I'd have it up in the page direction queue so that when they were ready to go to the next document, all I did was press enter and everyone would get there. And sort of passing that message on to counsel makes your life easier as well as theirs. And, you know, my dream is to go to every trial and be that person who's managing and navigating within those documents. So when you can assist counsel in doing that, and as well as advising them as to how to best get it done, having the script is a really helpful tool in order to do that.
That's exactly what we did, Stephanie. We had a script as well, and it made it so much easier and so much more efficient. There was no delay during argument. I knew what was coming up, and I had it ready and queued up. I also recommend speaking to your lawyer. If you're going to be assisting with page directing, speak to your lawyers to figure out how you're going to get prompted, because it is nice to have a script, and we did have a script, but sometimes counsel deviates from the script, which is going to happen, and they may go off tangent and they may refer to other documents. You're going to want to know how to get prompted so that if the lawyer wants to stay on a document, but they deviate into some other piece of law, you're not page directing and trying to figure out madly what document he's referring to. Figure out a prompt. The prompt that I had was, I'm going to direct you to page whatnot. And I knew at that point, hearing that phrase, that I had to page direct to the next document. So if I needed to stay on the document I was on, the lawyer wouldn't say anything to direct me. But if I heard those words, I knew I had to go to the next document. So prompts are really helpful, and it's really important, I thought, for myself to know what those prompts were instead of trying to figure out if the lawyer wants me to move to the next document or stay where I am.
So Gretel, I just wanted
yes.
to add as well, in terms of page direction, and we've seen that feature discussed by both you and Claire, it's important to note that each person has to be signed into CaseLines if you're going to be using the page direct feature. Sometimes there are situations, and one that we don't encourage, we certainly encourage you using the CaseLines feature of either using page direct or presentation mode. But in some instances, in particular, the judge may say, no, I'm not signing into CaseLines, I'm sitting back. So then you're faced with the situation of having to share your screen. And so we have to approach that aspect cautiously. And what I mean by that is, in essence, in the very same format that we're doing now, that we're sharing the screen with respect to this presentation, if you are sharing your screen, you could potentially risk exposing your private notes if you happen to have your notes panel open, and your index list, where that perhaps you might have access to some documents that other parties do not have access to. So when you're sharing your screen, you want to be sure that those two are turned off. So as part of your rehearsal, you have to prepare for that last minute that might be introduced during the housekeeping rules to say, Your Honor, we're going to be using page direction. If Your Honor comes back and says, no, I'm sitting back with my arms up in the air, then you're going to have to be prepared for that. So it's important to also perhaps download your notes report where you might have those notes that might be pertinent for counsel to address.
Thanks, Betty. That's a great point. And really, sharing a screen and using CaseLines really takes away from the features and functionality of CaseLines. So when you can, use the page direction and use the tool and have everybody log in separately. Ideally, that's the best way and the most secure way, really, because you don't want to be sharing private notes, especially inadvertently. So thanks for that, Betty. I'm also going to talk about access. So again, access in Ontario versus access in other provinces are going to look a little bit different. Ontario, again, has rolled out CaseLines. There's templates for all of our databases. Court staff have been trained and they know what the templates look like. So there's going to be templated security groups, and court staff and counsel are allowed to provide access to other users. Whereas in other provinces, CaseLines may be set up and hosted by counsel, or it may be set up and hosted by a service provider. And you'll see one of the points here that I have on the slide. We at Gowling, we don't have CaseLines. We use the court CaseLines databases. I know other provinces and other law firms use internally rolled out CaseLines product. And one of the concerns I had, because I don't have access to an internal database, what happens when I'm hosting a CaseLines database for other counsel? Is it going to be an issue that I'm hosting it, I'm an admin, and I can potentially see other counsel's notes, whatnot? Betty actually satisfied that concern for me yesterday and pointed out that even though you may be hosting the database on your environment, whether it's a law firm or somewhere else, you necessarily, just because you're an admin, you don't necessarily have access to opposing counsel notes, and you won't have access to the judge's notes. It's tied to login, which Betty had mentioned a few minutes ago. So that really alleviated the concerns I had. So I thought that was great. So I'm happy to hear that. So no concern on that point. So that's been addressed, and it's the last point on my slide here. So that's been addressed by Betty. And then finally, I have a few practical tips and tricks. If you're going to be using CaseLines and you're going to be uploading documents, which Claire very helpfully demonstrated in her slides, PDF bookmarks, there is a naming convention that you can apply in order to extract bookmark and dates in certain ways. All of that information is available on the Ontario Court's website. Really recommend taking a look at it. It's very helpful, and it will eliminate any rework if you happen to name your documents incorrectly, your bookmarks incorrectly. If you haven't applied first level bookmarks, if you've applied it differently, it'll eliminate any rework that might have to be redone if you've done it incorrectly in the first instance. Also, again, cross-reference your production numbers with CaseLines numbers. You don't want to be going into a CaseLines hearing with production numbers. You want to know what those CaseLines numbers are. And again, please, if you can, use the tools that are available in CaseLines. They're excellent. I did have a few chats with some judges, and they did mention to me, which I was surprised to hear, that not a lot of people use page direction. A lot of counsel don't use it, and I think that's mostly because they haven't, they're not comfortable with it yet. So getting your team comfortable with the tools, getting them comfortable with the technology is really important, because it's not difficult. It's really, really easy. Page direction is one of the great tools in CaseLines. Notes and tags, a great rule, makes you very efficient. Presentation mode and callouts, those are really, really helpful as well. And it makes you present your argument in a much better way, I think, using the technology that you have in your tool. And then finally, I'm going to push some training. There is CaseLines training available through Thomson Reuters and the OBA. Take advantage of that. It's, I think, available monthly through the OBA, and Betty has some training scheduled and it's coming up. So take advantage of that where you can. It's really, really useful, and it's a great way to learn how to use the product.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Gretel. We're going to turn it over to Tracy in Vancouver, who has an in-house use of CaseLines, and she's going to talk to us about that. Tracy, it's all yours.
Thanks, Stephanie. This first slide is just comparing the screens, how they look in CaseLines. So the top one is the Ontario Courts site that everyone's seen, and then the bottom one is actually our CaseLines internal instance. So the functionality for the internal instance is basically the functionality that the courts have. I like the different colors because for our lawyers, it's an indicator immediately to them, oh, I'm in the wrong site, I'm in the our internal site and I need to go to the Ontario site, or vice versa. What the Ontario courts see in the background is they see the entire master bundle. They see all of the permissions and all of the admin functions. And that's what you see with your internal instance as well. So having that functionality is really key to running a mediation or arbitration. So primarily when we first took it on about 6 months ago, we thought we would use it for mediations and arbitrations across Canada, and also for training, as Claire mentioned. Just having our lawyers in there and driving around before they have to go into a trial, and they know, what to expect and how to page direct or how to follow the presenter. Those really have been helpful. As far as mediations go, when we're the mediator, say in a family law matter, that is a real support to us, rather than just having straight PDFs. Having all the functionality of CaseLines makes sense, particularly if you have, say, two parties who have consulted lawyers but don't want to have a lot of lawyer interference at the mediation. You can just direct them to follow the screen and they know where to go. Beyond litigation, some other uses that we have for it, to prepare experts. If you're going to be doing an Ontario court trial, this will be the first time the experts have ever seen the platform. So if you can pre-train them and just run through your key documents and zoom in on the areas that you want them to see at the trial, then they're better prepared. And even for client meetings, if you have a large commercial leasing client and you're doing a whole bunch of leases for them, you can put them side by side, or you can put two versions of the documents side by side and have them just okay the changes right there. So it's really efficient, I think, for that. And also, as far as Miller Thomson is concerned, we want to have the same offering nationally. So even though certain provinces haven't moved to CaseLines or another platform yet, just having the ability to offer that to the lawyers is really key to us. So yeah, as I mentioned, some of the benefits: full administrative control, master bundle access, creating custom templates, including the ability to create templates for like exhibit stamping. So if you bring in a court reporter from a vendor, you know, they can see the stamp right there and have the ability to electronically stamp it. We do find that within the court platform, even, we have seen some electronic stamping from the court clerk, and sometimes also they'll go away and then give you back PDFs. So they're not actually stamping in the platform. But I think that'll change over time. I think the courts will move to electronically stamping everything. It has the same presentation features outside the Ontario courts as well as within. So lawyers have said to us that they really liked early on the follow the presenter feature, and they got really good feedback from the judges when they used it versus maybe opposing counsel kind of fumbling around and trying to tell the judge where to go. So yeah, that and the direct others to a page, basically the same sort of thing. So it has a lot of benefits over just a PDF bundle or straight PDFs that we're trying to encourage our lawyers to use. For the mediations, the request documents feature is a feature where you can create a link to a sub bundle and then send that link in an email to, say, a lay litigant. They click on it and they can upload their documents directly into that sub bundle in CaseLines. So, you know, one of the things I really like about Thomson Reuters is that they are proactive, and you'll see continuous upgrades and new features coming along. And so, you know, it makes you feel that when I first started with CaseLines, I thought it's a little bit simplistic. You know, I don't know whether I like it or not, but just having those constant upgrades and, you know, Thomson Reuters seems really concerned about getting it right and improving the product. And I think from the initial rollout that we first saw, it has gotten better, and the lawyers really like it now. So, you know, getting over those challenges of adoptability and internal change management, they make it a lot easier to do that. So we are, just like Claire mentioned, trying to implement national standards, training. We try and use the instances, whether it's the court instance or our internal instance, in the same way, and train the lawyers to, you know, progress in both of them seamlessly. For the instance outside the Ontario courts, there is a small upload fee charge. So we want to make sure that of the cost implications of larger matters in there, although Thomson Reuters does offer bundled pricing as well. You do have to make sure that, you know, as Gretel mentioned, you're not loading duplicates. You know, you're making sure that the documents you do load are key and you're going to use them, right? So you don't want to waste the client money, but you also want to make sure that you have everything that you need. So our main challenges, I think, though, have been with our insurance group, for example, getting them out of that mindset to, I can just use Zoom and display my bulk PDFs, and I don't need another tool to help me present or navigate around. But I think once they get into it and once they use it, they really do like using CaseLines. So yeah, for us, it makes sense at Miller Thomson because, you know, CaseLines is hosted by Thomson Reuters in Canada. That's a vendor that the lawyers are familiar with. It's based on Microsoft Azure. So as far as security is concerned, you know, that alleviates some of the concerns that the firm has on that side. And it also has a bilingual interface, and they offer bilingual support. So if we ever do use it in Quebec, then we have everything that we need there.
That's
Tracy, if
fantastic.
I can also,
Tracy.
sorry, Stephanie.
No,
I
go
just
ahead,
wanted
Betty.
to also add another use case with respect to, I'll refer to it as a law firm instance of CaseLines, is consider using it for discoveries, intending your examinations for discovery. I mean, what better way than to show up at your discovery with just, your laptop signing into CaseLines rather than multiple screens and or if you're still working with paper, those multiple production binders. So we've seen it being used very effectively in terms of conducting examinations for discoveries as well.
I would just add to that, Betty, that sometimes I think the simplicity of CaseLines makes it so usable, and that you do have these beautiful features that can enhance your case, and you have everything there that other platforms provide, but you also just have something where it's easy for a lawyer or a clerk, anyone to just log in and be shown the evidence. And I love that about CaseLines because it's incredibly user-friendly on that front. And so I'll pass it over to you so you can let us know the inside scoop about what's next in the life of CaseLines.
Yeah, and if I could just add one little comment, to Tracy's point about PDF version of a document versus the CaseLines same experience, is that CaseLines brings to the table a lot of litigation tools that you would need that are very simplistic or not even or non-existent rather in a PDF version. So again, things to consider. So we'll wrap up with just a couple more minutes. We want to be mindful of time and then want to open up the floor to any questions. So I really wanted just to sort of, talk about what's happening in Ontario as well as what's happening, with respect to our neighbors in other provinces as well. Certainly, Ontario has implemented it. It's, of course, in full force across all of the province in all of the regions. It's written into our rules of civil procedure as Rule 4.05. You can expect to see enhancements to CaseLines, of course. Some of it are driven by suggestions from the Ontario court as well as suggestions from our users, as Tracy alluded to. Currently, we are in the process of rolling it out to the Ontario Court of Justice as well. So you can expect to see that with respect to family matters that are being dealt with in the OCJ, as well as some criminal matters that will be coming up. Basically, in terms of the other provinces, all eyes are on MAG and, the success of CaseLines, if you will, within the scope of MAG. That's the Ministry of Attorney General, of course. And it's interesting because I was recently presenting at another conference with an esteemed judge in the Ontario courts. And she had mentioned and said, that the courts are not going to be going back to paper, even when we physically return to the courtroom. The courts are going to continue to file documents electronically through their online portal, so they're going to be doing some enhancements to that. And then, it's important to also understand that the judges do not receive a copy of the filed material, so they heavily rely on the material that is uploaded to CaseLines. So it is something that is going to be here for a long time, not just with respect to our virtual attendance, but certainly in terms of our physical attendance as well when we return to the courtroom. It's been emphasized a couple of times by my colleagues here about discussion, collaboration, discuss with counsel the uploading of the materials. What will the briefs look like? Should you be preparing a joint brief of documents so that you decrease the duplication efforts? Perhaps you could even have a case conference to implement a virtual hearing protocol if you're attending virtual hearings. And that hearing protocol, by the way, is available on the SCJ website. You can also have or create something similar to a trial management protocol, something like similar to a discovery plan, if you will, where all parties will sort of discuss and put it to paper, how documentary evidence will be exchanged. Are you going to use page direction? Are you going to use present mode, et cetera, et cetera? You can discuss how the documents will be presented, how the witness will give their evidence, et cetera. So that's another thing to consider as well. With respect to the Alberta courts and the BC courts, it's not been mandated as it has been in the Ontario courts, but certainly the Alberta courts it is encouraged by judges as Claire mentioned, Justice Edsvik is a huge fan of it. They encourage the use of CaseLines for complex commercial litigation matters. But again, it's up to the law firm. It's up to them to manage and have that discussion, and then of course present to the court themselves prior to attending any hearing. In terms of BC as well, it's not mandated, but it is extremely popular in the BC courts by way of attendance at several hearings and trials. If you could just click on the next slide, please, for me. This is actually an example of a courtroom setting at the BC court. It was for a rather lengthy trial, and as you can see, it's set up in such a way that it's just all screens. Counsel appeared physically in the courtroom. There were several different counts. I believe there were 7 and a multitude of different experts. The nice thing with CaseLines is that the experts were able to attend that trial remotely, simply by signing into that Zoom call, if you will, albeit that the trial was conducted in person, and then of course being directed accordingly to the evidence. In this example here, if a service provider was hired, consider them a trial operator, if you will, to present in court. And in fact, some of the commentary that came back from the judge is the 77-day trial was actually whittled down into 46 days. And so he was convinced, of course, that CaseLines improved the efficiency of that trial. In fact, he did comment that, when he went home over the weekend, all he had to do was bring a laptop and not have to bring home binders and binders of evidence to then, of course, formulate his decision or reasons for judgment. So go to the next slide, please. So this is actually through the lens of the judge, if you will. Of course, the judge had the benefit and was a little spoiled by having 3 different screens, as you see here. So CaseLines was is presented on the left side. He was being directed accordingly by the trial operator. The judge would then create his own notations outside of the scope of CaseLines as he felt comfortable that way. And then the live transcript feed was also being displayed on the right-hand side of the screen. So from his viewpoint, this is what he could see here as well. So let's just circle back to the slide again so I can just wrap up with some of the new features coming down the pipeline. By way of some of the new features recently released, you'll see that there's what we refer to as the witness feature. It's a call out, so you're able to pinpoint a specific sentence or paragraph on your document and zoom it out, if you will, call out feature. Further witness enhancements, if you will be the ability to sort of solidify that document and enter that as the exhibit, if you will, with that call out in place. Coming down the pipeline as well within the new year, of course, is the ability of transferring the files seamlessly between a counsel's version of CaseLines, so that on-premise version of CaseLines, to the court files. So as they're doing their dress rehearsal and the preparatory work in their own instance of CaseLines, law firms can then easily push it over to the court for the upload process. And then, of course, as well, the ability to accept these load files from the various e-discovery platforms as well. Finally, in terms of resources, we've alluded to the fact that you should keep your eye on to the notices to the profession and the Superior Court of Justice, because they're changing continuously. Certainly the FAQs regarding CaseLines is certainly helpful to everyone. And they've also recommended tips to the bar. In fact, they've established 16 tips, if you will. There's also support embedded within the scope of the platform itself when you sign in. Simply click on that support tab and you will be taken to a variety of different guidelines, tips and tricks, and on-demand videos. And by way of training, the OBA, of course, provides monthly specialized training courses, as well as Thomson Reuters does as well. Thank you. Back over to you, Stephanie.
Thanks, everybody. I'm going to open up to the floor for questions. I'm looking at our Q&A right now, and maybe we were very thorough because there are not any questions currently, but we're happy to accept them. While we wait for questions to come pouring in, Thomson Reuters has generously provided us with a raffle item, a $100 gift card to Best Buy. So I have all of the attendees in a random sort of thing, and I'm just going to press the button. And the winner of that gift card is Liz Ford at Faskins. So Liz, we will be in touch with you to provide that over to you. We will provide that to you after the webinar. And yes, there will be a link to the recording. It will be on the ACEDS YouTube subscription page, but I will also circulate that out to all the attendees today. So Alvin has a question. Am I correct that if you are in present mode, it's always the left screen and never the right screen? Betty, do you want to field that one?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
So Alvin has asked if I am in present mode, am I correct that it's always the left screen and never the right screen?
Depending on how you're clicking your icons.
So I think Claire,
I believe it's based on how you've selected your icons in terms of what is parked and what is active.
So I think Claire in her slides showed us the example of selecting which one that you wanted to have in present mode.
If you wanted to present mode on the right-hand screen, you switch the toolbar to pink, basically, or to, I think that's the same in the Ontario one as well. In review evidence, the colors are the same, blue and burgundy. So
yes.
As long as you are have shifted the color and the pane that is controlled by the toolbar to the pink burgundy one, then present will reflect what is going on in the right pane.
Well, Alvin always thought it was the left side, but not like Beyonce. You got to use either screen, Alvin. So that's great. If there's no more questions, we'll keep it open for just a little bit longer, but I have to say thank you to all of our panelists today. I appreciate you giving your time so generously to the community and to be talking about my favorite topic. It's a nerd alert for me. My team knows that when we talk about CaseLines, I just get very excited because I'm no longer surrounded by binders and paper, and I just have an ease of navigation with the program. And I think that's been properly communicated today, and I hope that it's adopted and more used as we go forward. Betty, it made me really excited when you said you had that conversation with the judge and they weren't going back to paper. It just made me very happy. So thank you for making my day. We don't have any more questions. So to that, I will say goodbye to the community. Thank you all for joining. And thanks to everybody else for participating. And I hope to see you sometime in the future.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Take good
Bye.
care.
Bye.